Hey guys, this is Paul from Smart Easy DIY. Welcome to the next video in my garage build series. So this is episode 15 in the garage build series, part 2 of making the trusses. If you missed the first one, go watch the previous video that I did. That'll get you up to speed on building the trusses. Now before you get started with something like this, make sure that it's approved for your area. For here, since it was for an outbuilding, I did not need an engineer stamp on it, but that might vary a lot based on location, so be sure to check your local building codes before you attempt something like this. Okay, so I had put that truss together over there on the garage floor, and then I used a backhoe with the forks on it, brought it over here because that was tall enough. So I carried it over here. I had my wife kind of hold one end just to guide it. So I got it set up over here. You can see I still got all the truss material here that I cut. I still got my canopy up. I moved like my saw station and all that over there out of the way. So yeah, lots of pieces. So you really have to think through this, whether it's worth it for the cost savings, because I already have 4 days into cutting all the materials. I might have another 3 days into building these, so I'm going to have a solid week, but I'm going to save $5,000, so I guess I got to see in the end if it's worth it with the time I take off of work to do this and all that. But it is nice knowing that you can build your own if you need to, as long as you can get it approved for the area that you're building in. So that might not be the case everywhere, but man, these things are solid. They're heavy duty. So what I did is, this is my pattern truss. This is what I'm going to build everything off of. This is what I brought over here. So I put all the gussets over there when it was still on the floor laid out. Put all the gussets on one side and then brought it over here, laid it down, kind of shimmed it up. I just doing it in the parking lot here, so it's not ideal, but it's the spot that I have. So I kind of made it nice and flat the best I could, shimmed it up with some plywood, some blocks, different things like that to get it level and flat as much as I could. You can kind of tell if it's laying flat or not because it's going to pick up or push down when you're working on it, things like that. So then once this one was here, I built another one on top of it, and I just put a couple screws in, which I'll show you. I screwed the peak together, put those two in first, the outside ones. Screw the peak together to each other, those stay, those screws, and they won't hurt anything. And then I put a screw in here where it's not going to get covered up by the gusset. Put it over here, and then I screwed those together into each other. Then I came and put one down here on the end. The next my series is to put this center one in, because that goes exactly where it goes. Then I put a screw in each end of that, clear of the gussets. And then I did the same over here. I got this one in place, brought this one down, and then I put these bottom ones in. Then these little braces, I ended up just nailing them with the nailer just to toenail them in place. So my main goal is just to get all that stuff set in place until I can get the gussets on. Then I know that it's all tied together. So then I flipped this truss over, which is quite heavy, but I flipped it over. Now I'm going to gusset the other side. That's what these are all laying out here for. So I'm going to glue them and nail them. I got them all laid out kind of where they go. And then I think normally what I would do is just keep stacking them on top of each other. As I build this one, I'd flip it over, gusset the other side, and then stack it here. But I'm going to run out of room because of the house here and everything. So I'm going to have to take these out of here as I build them and stack them somewhere else. So that's kind of the process for my situation. Okay, so I was going to show you how I lay out my trusses here on top of my template. So I just set this one. I have the previous joint here to line up with, and sometimes these factory cuts aren't perfect, so you want to go with the longest point. Like this one's back a 16th, but it's touching right there. And so what I do is I check both sides and do the same thing here. It's back a little there, but it's touching there. So crown up. And then I do that one first, get that one out of the way. Then I usually come up here and start at the peak and work down. So up here I line the peak up as far as sideways goes. Get it down here too. And then here I got the joint to look at to slide this up right where it goes. And then again I hit the long point wherever it touches, because these factory cuts aren't perfect sometimes. Some of these I recut, but some I left because it was just a lot of work. You can kind of see if your peak lines up good. Most important is lined up right here on the edge. And for this, and I like to screw all these peaks just to make sure that they're all going to stay in exactly the same spot. Now you want to check this and make sure that this lines up. And since you're lined up there and the peak screwed together, then the peak has to be in place right there where it is. Then this I screw in place permanently as well. It's not for structural, it's just to hold it together for now. Sometimes if these things are crazy crooked, you can put a screw in the middle, straighten it up, then come down here with a clamp and clamp it over. I've had to do that in a couple, but for the most part, they've been really good. You can check your ends, which it looks really good there. Then since I'm doing one end, I like to do this guy next. So then I screw this one together. And they line up beautiful. I really haven't had any trouble since I cut everything carefully. Everything's just fit. Besides having an occasional crooked one that I have to straighten, haven't had any problems with things being out of line. Now the one little trick, since I'm screwing through this one into this one, I usually cheat this one over just a little bit, just a fuzz, so that way when this goes in, it'll suck it over just a little bit. If you line it up perfectly to start with, it'll overdraw it. See how it's nice and flush now when you're all done? Okay, so now that I got the perimeter all in and screwed, now I can go ahead and do all my braces in there. I usually just set these in close. Now to fasten these ones, I've just been using my 18 gauge brad nailer. I don't want much to hold it. I've been using my framing nailer sometimes, but then it's almost is too much nail. You can screw these if you want, but since they're just kind of held there temporarily, until the gussets hold them, unless they're really twisted, I just shoot them with the brad nailer. That holds them right in place. Oh, the other reason I switched to this instead of the air one is it doesn't kick up a bunch of gravel in my situation. So all those little brad nails do is hold it in place until the glue and the plywood is on there, and then they won't go anywhere. So it's good to have an assortment of earplugs. These are ones that I tried. For me, earplugs are kind of tough because on my right side, I had eardrum surgery when I was first grade. And so earplugs don't like to stay in very well for me. So I don't like these kind typically. Those kind don't like to stay in very good. So usually the foam ones work best for me. But it's good to wear good ear protection for when you're doing stuff. Even my boys, if they're anywhere close, they wear these. I got all kinds of stuff. I got those kind for when it gets not so hot out. These are better for when you're really hot because they don't make you sweat, like those foam padded ones, but those ones work really good. But the main point was that I wanted to say is it's good to have good hearing protection, especially if you're running a nailer or saw, things like that a lot of times, because after a while, it does affect your hearing. So protect that while you're young. Then I was going to show you really quick what I'm using. So I'm using the PL375 heavy duty construction adhesive. So the nails I'm using are these 2-inch 0.99 shank on them. I wanted them at least that big, if not bigger, but this is the biggest one I could get. Screw shank, so I got those. So that's what I'm using, and there's a bunch in a box, 9,000 in a box. I got these at nailgundepot.com, and there's some kind of code. If I find the code, I'll put it down in the video description. If you're interested, you can get a 5 or 10% discount, I believe, so you can check that out when the time comes. So I did a test with the PL375 and with the Liquid Nails equivalent one, the heavy duty construction adhesive. I'll see if I can find a picture. I'll include that if I can, but I did do a test of those, let them sit for 48 hours, and I like this one better, the way that it held together. So that's why I chose the PL for doing this. So I'm using a Bostitch nailer here. That's what I have, coil nailer. This thing is terribly heavy, so I would recommend something like a Metabo if you're getting a new one. And I put the PL on. Trying to get too close to the edge because it'll spread out. Then I don't want it sticking down at all for sure here. So keep it up a little if anything. And kind of line it up with the second one below it if you have to. If you're working on the second side. I like to go through and do the perimeter and then just kind of infill through the middle. Okay, so I got that truss all nailed together. You can see going down through there. Now it might look like a lot of nails, but I like to make sure that it's held together really well so it's not going anywhere. I got a little excessive with my glue there. Forgot that that was down a little bit. So in an instance like this where I was more concerned with tying this one in here than this part up here, because there's no joint up here in the top cord, that's why I kept that down a little bit and made it more down in here. So that was my thinking with that. Same for there. I cheated it down just a fuzz from the peak, not a whole lot, but a little bit just to get that. Oh, I didn't nail that one. I got to nail that one. Good thing I came back and looked. So yeah, just a lot of repeating, a lot of nailing. I'm having a little trouble with my gun misfiring now and then. You can see there's like some empty holes like that, but usually I check and after a couple times it starts shooting again. I add some WD-40 on the feeding mechanism, made sure to keep it oiled regularly inside, but I still have issues now and then, but I think that's just kind of par for the course.
You know that Metabo coil nailer that I was talking about? The siding nailer? I finally got one. After using that Bossage, it's a framing nailer, so it's a lot heavier. I decided I might as well get this lighter one because I got a lot of nails to drive. I know I'm not comparing apples to apples because the Bossage is a framer, it can handle up to 3.5-inch nails. The Metabo is a siding nailer, it can only handle up to 2.5, I believe, but look at the size and the weight difference on these things. So yeah, the Metabo was a great choice. I was really happy with it overall. It did really well for me. So I think the Bossage I'm just going to keep for some framing jobs down the road.
So I think it's most important to have this one flat where I begin the truss process. For this one here where I flip it over, I tried to get it pretty flat for putting the second side on, but it's not quite as crucial, I don't think, as the first side. I want to try to put those on when they're nice and flat. But this is, try to get it as flat as possible for this too. That's why it's nice to do on a floor if you can. But I just don't have that option or the room. So I'm just going to show this along with the time lapse probably, just to try to get some good footage for you guys of kind of the process of how I do this. So I also got this air compressor from Lowe's. It's the Cobalt Quiet Tech. I really like that part because they are super quiet compared to other ones. This is a 26 gallon and I really like how it keeps up with my nailer. So if you're going to be doing a lot of nailing, it's good to have a lots of quantity of air because otherwise your compressor will run all the time and it won't be able to keep up with you. I have no complaints with this Metabo nailer. If you're needing a nailer and you're interested in it, I'll include a link down in the video description below the video where you can find this one if you want, or you can look at similar ones. But overall, this thing, I have no complaints, hardly ever jams with all the nails I've been doing, and it's really lightweight, is really strong, and seems to do a really nice job. So let's get doing some nailing. Once in a while, if you hit a knot, you'll have them stick up like that. You just hammer them down when you're done.
So for this one, I like to tack the perimeter. And then for this one, since I have different heights I'm dealing with, right here's the joint in the wood, and like this side is 2x10, this side is 2x8. So let's say we pick the side that is 2x8. You can see where that line is. Then you can just finish out the section that's 2x8, and then you can go over here and do the side that's 2x10. I just usually eye across and keep it down a little from the edge. These 2x4s are a little tricky, but that's what I do, is just eye that in as well, follow the angle. If you need to, you can get something and make a straight line.
So I got a stack of about 14 done right here, and my pile's growing smaller. So I've been stacking them over here. So all I have right now is I have my backhoe with forks, and that works pretty good to get them up as high as I need to get them stacked. This is as high as I can stack them with this. Usually I get it close as I can, and then I do that part, and my wife drives and lowers it and backs it up for me, gets it out of the way. It's pretty much a two-person job for that. Now I'm starting a new stack over here. I want to leave room to get over here to set them when I'm ready, when I build the walls and stuff like that. So I just kind of built this up temporarily. I blocked it up, supported it the best I could, because I wanted it as flat as possible. It goes downhill a little bit, but it's pretty flat as far as where it's setting. That's my goal. So I'm trying to get them all stacked there. Okay, so I'm laying out my end truss here. I decided that what I'm going to do for my end truss is I'm going to drop it down the width of a 2x6. So it's down 5.5 straight down this way. And so I'm going to put outlookers on for the overhang. It'll make it nice and strong. And for the one end where I'm going to do a 4-foot spacing because of a stairway, since they're attic style trusses, I have to space the whole truss 4 feet so that I can get upstairs with my stairway because there's no way to header it off. So what I need to do at the end where the trusses are going to go is double them up, space them 4 feet. So then I'm going to have about a 2-foot overhang, roughly. It's probably going to be about 20 inches. But I'm going to do 2x6s every 16 inches, which I'll show you over there in my layout. So because of that, I also needed to get rid of my overhang here. So this is how it came out. I went with my 32 foot right to there, just went straight up. So that's going to sit on the wall. So this truss here is going to continue the overhang out here. And then it's just going to fill in that overhang with the rest of the overhang on the end. Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe once I'm installing it, you'll see. Then what I did is I built this truss all the way down 5.5 inches. So the bottom cord stays the same. All those stayed the same. The webbing I cheated over here just a little bit. That way it could come out a little better with the way this came out, because the webbing for this one now came out over here. And then I just lined this one up with it. It's close enough to splitting the distance there. It's not going to have to line up with anything, so that's okay. The other thing that I did, so I kept everything the same, places where it was. So I added in for a window here. So this is going to be a 3-foot by 4-foot window on the end, the gable end. So I figured out what height I wanted to go. I wanted to go 3 foot from the floor here. That's going to be the floor. I didn't want to crowd the top too tall. So I figured that's a pretty good spacing for what I need. And then I wanted to fill this in for plywood, so the plywood to have something to nail to on the end truss. So what I decided to do is I decided to start with my plywood sheets in the center here. Because of this window, it's going to get cut out a little bit. So I went 2-foot spacing from there, which came out a little bit weird, but it comes out here. This is going to be on the other side, of course, so there's no gussets going to be in the way. And then for this part here, this is close enough, I figured, for the span, since I'm just going to do metal siding over top of it, so that's going to be okay. Otherwise, if I wanted it a little closer there, I could put some infill pieces there. So that's the way that came out. That's why that's laid out this way. Up here, I thought about putting some little pieces in here to continue this up, but nothing's going to splice on there plywood-wise, and it's got all this other stuff to nail to, so that should be good once the plywood's on there. So the other thing, I was going to put gussets on all these infill pieces here, but I think as long as they can hang together, I'm going to wait. I thought about putting some temporary stuff on there, but on the other side of this wall, I'm going to have to stud this in someday once the building is up, and before I insulate it, I'm going to have to frame around the window, frame around this end wall. So I didn't really want any gussets in the way inside because it's going to cause problems for me. Now, if this was a typical truss, you wouldn't have that problem because you'd have metal plates and they'd be so thin that that wouldn't be an issue. But for me, since I'm building my own with this 3/4 plywood sticking out, I'm going to have that as a concern. So I was thinking about putting something on there temporarily. I did toe screw them really well, so I think they're going to hang together just fine. All the weight is being taken by that. It's mainly just if it's a little floppy getting it up there. Once it's up there and the plywood is nailed to it, I'm not worried about it because then it's going to get a stud wall like I was saying. So on the end here, I wanted to show you how I laid this out. So you guys might remember these blocks that I made when I was laying the truss out. So this is to mock up the sub fascia, and this is to mock up 5/8 inch CDX on the roof. So what I did is I figured out where this is going to come out, and for my outlookers here, I want this to come out for plywood, okay, and I decided to go 16 inch on center instead of 24. It only saves a couple 2x4s by going 24, so I want to have the extra strength on the overhang, so I'm going to go 16 inch center layout. So I went from right here because that's going to represent where my plywood is going to go. I could have cheated this down a little, but I want to have a little bit of leeway because it's not exact sometimes when you're going up and down through there. So I don't want these two to have a problem, and then the drip edge is going to cover that anyway. So that's how I came up with 16 inch on center. So what I did, I wanted to do this while this truss is still in layout here on top of this one where it goes right in place. So I went 16 inch, all the way up through. And then I used a square and transferred it to this because this is going to represent right now where the 2x6 is going to sit, the outlookers, and then it's going to sit on top of this truss. So that's why I made marks on top of the outside truss. So I got to thinking, I don't know why I made these marks anyway, except I did need to make them for reference for transferring it down to that one. But this is going to get covered up because this is going to be the double truss and it's going to get all glued together. So these lines are going to disappear anyway. So I transferred them down here. That way I can reference them later. because when the double truss gets glued together, see what I'm doing, I saved my last pattern, and then I'm building my 2 end trusses because I know they are special. And then I wanted to have this one, the pattern piece, be my last one that's going to get hooked up to the double truss. So that's why I'm doing it in that order. I need to build those before the double truss is on there. So then what happens is once I build the double truss, gets it on here, I can transfer this mark onto that one, which really just marked on one is good enough because they're going to be married together for life. So I don't really need to worry about it actually. So yeah, so that's how I figured out what my layout is. I'm going to do this down on the ground so I don't have to think about it when I get up there. So my other plan is now that this end truss is built, I can flip this one over and build the other one on top of it so I don't have to figure all the cuts out and everything again. I can just make them be a pair together as this will be the template for the last end one, and then I don't have to figure it out again. So one time is enough. So yeah, I nailed this one extra heavy because it only gets gussets on one side, but it should be nice and strong. It's time to get these double trusses ready to go. So this one right here is my pattern one, the very original truss that I made. So I'm sandwiching these two together. So what I'm going to do, so I picked this up with the backhoe on the top there, just in the peak. So I got to be careful when I let that down because of getting in the glue. But I'm going to do the same as what I used on the trusses. I'm going to use this PL 375, this heavy duty construction adhesive. So then I'm going to use some 3-inch, I have these are galvanized, but I have the only ring shank I have because I really want to use ring shank, and I'm going to use 3-inch so they don't stick through. Even then I might angle them slightly. But so that's what I'm going to do. Let's glue that all together, put this together, and then nail it together with some ring shank. Okay, so the PL 375, just going to glue it really nice like I did the truss. Okay, so I had enough glue to glue this all down. I had a little extra, but I wanted to use it all up. I had a 1.5 tubes, so this was perfect for this. So Mrs. Smart Easy DIY is in the backhoe. She's going to lower this down for me slowly. I'm going to try to just get it down here and get it in place a little bit at a time. So we'll see how this goes. Okay, as it comes down, I'm going to try to drag this over a little bit. Okay, that's looking pretty sweet. Okay, yeah, just tip it down a little bit. Slowly. Now my block is in the way. Okay, the strap out. 3-inch galvanized ring shank really hold, but I'm just tipping them a little bit in case they pop through. Just a little bit. Just kind of nailing it like a header. I figure more can't hurt. I'll probably put some through the plywood here in some spots, but first I'm going to go through and do all these. And I do the webbing and everything. Alright, so after I got the truss all glued and nailed together, so this double truss is all ready to go now, I flipped it over on the other side because this is the back side. It's going to go towards the stairway that I'm doing. So what I did is, I had marked this ahead of time when I did it, but I'm doing joist hangers on all this end because the other one is going to sit on top of the end truss. Remember how I had made the end truss shorter so that way the 2x6 can sit on it and go over top of it? So this is working out good. So what I did here, I got some 2x6 hangers. These are Simpson Strong Tie. It's the LUS 26 hanger, and then I'm using some strip nails here, Metabo ones, because that's what I could get. They're made for joist hanger nails. And then this is kind of a cheap gun, but it works good. This is the Grip Right joist hanger nailer. I didn't want to get a cordless because I didn't want to get a Metabo because I don't really have anything else Metabo that's cordless. For the few times that I use a joist hanger nailer, this came in really handy. I decided to get it. You can hand nail all these, but I'm going to be using it for future projects, so I figured I might as well get it. So what I like to do, I wanted to show you an example here. When you're doing joist hangers, they always come like this. So if you just squeeze them a little bit, it tightens them up. And then I like to use an actual 2x6 block that is 5.5. And then I make my first edge good with that, right with the block there. And this works awesome to nail it. And then I can tighten it up with that. So then you can see, because you want to be able to get your 2x in and out of there pretty easy. You don't want it to fight it. If you just do it by the lines that are on here that you draw, it can be a little bit tight, and then you fight to get your 2x6 in there. This way, it slides right in. So that way it's perfectly flush on top when you're done, like that. So just a scrap of 2x6, it works great. Now as I'm going along here with doing plywood gussets, it does present a little bit of a problem here. I didn't know how this was going to come out for sure. So this is really the only spot. I'm just going to have to put a strip of 3/4 plywood in here, I think, to fill that gap up. And then it'll get anchored into the truss and into this one that's secure. So I think that's going to be just fine. I'm going to run that strip all the way up here to catch this one, because there's 3 in there. Then everything else, like those are in the plywood already. Down here, there's a couple in the plywood, but they're fully in it. And then, so it's just going to make for a little different length of the outlookers, but I'm going to have to trim them off anyway. Just going to cut 12 footers in half, let them run wild and cut them off later. So that variation is not going to matter for that. The only other problem right here, I had to take the corner off right here, just that little corner. But that little bit was fine. I'm going to have to do the same thing over there. That was really the only problem I had. I'm going to have to do the same thing with in here on the bottom cord. So I might end up having to do some of that, but that'll be just fine. If you buy your trusses and you don't have this 3/4 gussets in the way, then you won't have this issue. If you do end up building your own, then you're going to have these similar things to think about. But that's minor. You just work through it. So, but just wanted to give you a heads up about that. Okay, so this truss is all ready to go. I got all the hangers on everywhere, all the way down here, and I even did it down here on the bottom cord, except over there by the stairs, right over on that end. So here I had 2x10 hangers, so they stick up over a little bit in this 2x8, but that's okay. I might even stick with 2x10 down through here, depending what I have, but I might do 2x8s for the ceiling joists. But rather too big than too small is the way I figure. But that's what I had. So anyway, right here in this area, this first 8 feet, I want to leave open for stairs. And when I go to finish that off for stairs, I might end up having to sheet in between there. I'm not sure quite how that's going to finish out yet. I'll figure that out when I build the building. But as far as this goes, I figured it's a lot easier to do the hangers on the ground now instead of up in the air, because I could easily do them later up in the air, but I want to be able to get some of that in to brace the center when I'm doing this. So that is the reason for that.
Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video of building the trusses. This concludes part 2. So I am ready to move on, and next we're going to be working on getting ready to build walls. But before we do that, I have this metal piece that I bent up to cap the foam, and then I'm going to be putting foam down for frost protection on my slab perimeter. So be looking out for that video next, and after that we'll build some walls. So subscribe. Thanks for following along, guys. I appreciate it.